Right. Thank you for that introduction, Claire. Just pulling my slides. All right. Hello, folks. My name is Martin Farley, and I work at mostly UCL and King's College London around sustainable labs, and I manage the LEAF program from UCL. To get started today, I thought I would just do a very quick introduction about why we're doing this, and then show you LEAF very quickly today. You know, it's always good to start with the good. So obviously, science is doing a lot of good, and that's in the news a lot. But equally, science is affected by quite a few pressures today. The first pressure that I want to mention is that obviously we have the largest workforce that we've ever had. So the most PhD graduates in the sciences that we've ever had. I got a little quiz question coming very quickly about that. We have plenty left to research, and COVID has highlighted that quite well. So plenty left to study. But it's also the most competitive funding environment that it's ever been. So while there's more investment going into the sciences, the chances of winning a grant are at an all-time low. So the resources to the financial resources to implement science are scarce. You know, I should add is that the physical resources to conduct science are actually extremely limited right now. And I don't have a bullet point on here, but if you look around, most labs are posting that they're actually short on materials. And when you speak to most suppliers right now about their plastics productions, they'll tell you that their factories are at capacity. In some ways, you could almost say that scientific growth in this moment right now is at capacity, which has implications for our environment. You know, one of the other things that's facing science is that we're in the midst of a climate crisis, and that's the graph there on the right. It's from NASA, and it's the nicest way to say that the spike there on the right is associated with CO2 levels in our current environment. And it's going to affect every facet of society, including science. The other area that's under duress in science is its methods. Actually, this Friday, there's a conference, UKRN, UK Reproducibility Network, I'll mention in a sec. But the crisis of reproducibility is around the issue that a lot of the science and papers coming out of higher education aren't always reproducible. And this is a survey that was validating that out of Nature. The reason we're talking about this is that you know, these studies that are not reproducible, it's not really because of bad photoshopping or something. It's typically because of good, well, lab practices. And what we're going to recommend today around sustainability is good lab practice. And when we have poor lab practice, not only are we sometimes unsustainable, we might lead to some papers that might not be as reproducible. And with the resources that go into the sciences, I think that becomes a very big sustainability issue, especially when we see the rates of irreproducibility that are measured sometimes in the sciences. What I'm trying to say is that science has plenty of people, plenty left to research. It's under financial and resource challenges, and it's got concerns over methods, and we're in the midst of a climate crisis. We combine that with the fact that the UK has made a commendable goal to be carbon neutral by 2050, but at the same time is planning on investing hugely in its sciences. And, you know, those two, something's got to give. We have to look at the efficiency of our science if we're going to make it towards that carbon neutrality goal. Now, for those who work in sustainability, this is the joke. This is a statue called Politicians Debating Climate Change. I wanted to give a very short quiz just to highlight this topic, which is lab plastics were estimated to contribute what percentage to the total global plastic waste in 2014? For the sake of time, I'll tell you, it was 1.8%, around 2%, probably higher now. An ultra low temperature freezer uses as much energy in a year as, we have hundreds of these around our institutions, and the answer is a household. So each freezer uses as much energy as a household. What piece of equipment that I've listed in front of here uses the most energy? Again, just for time, I'll say it's fume cupboards, and they use around 2 to 3 houses worth of energy per fume cupboard, with that range often coming in how they set up, but also in terms of how users use them. So we can reduce that from sometimes 3 to 2 if users are better at closing the sash. Between 2007 and 2013, the world economy grew by 20.1%. How fast did gross expenditure on research and development grow by? I'd be really interested to see some updated stats for this, but the answer was 30.2%. So at that time, during a recession. I guess we're in one as well, anyways. But the research outpaced the global economy by around 50% in terms of rate of growth, which is pretty incredible. Researchers account for what percent of the population, world population? Sometimes people ask, why are we looking at scientists? Why are we looking at research? Well, around 2% of the world's GDP comes from science. And I'll give you the answer here. Around 0.1% of the world's population are scientists. So you can start to see that a small group of people have an incredible impact in terms of the environment, especially with how carbon intensive the sciences are. This is a thought-provoking question. I don't have an answer for it, but in terms of reproducibility, what percent of the research that we conduct actually gets published or is even made accessible? And that just relates to the reproducibility bits that I was mentioning before. Right, so labs are extremely resource intensive. They use 3 to 10 times more energy than typical academic spaces. Within our institutions like King's and UCL, they're using around 50 to 60% of the energy. So if we're going to talk about our carbon goals, we have to talk about the labs. This is a visual description of what I was saying before. NMRs we can't do as much about, I will mention though. The more specified equipment is more difficult to make improvements on. Sustainable labs and green labs is a pretty big topic today, and you've probably heard bits about it, and it's growing in popularity. Very quickly, I'll mention that green chemistry kind of sits onto its own, and it's about the substitution or replacement of harmful chemicals for less harmful reagents. But sustainable labs and green labs is this big sort of topic that looks at the built environment, equipment and consumables, and operations, which is what you have agency over typically. I won't talk about the built environment today, and even equipment and consumables, we won't talk into detail, but I will say that what's missing in this sector is life cycle carbon assessments, and that manufacturers today, we're limited by the fact that we don't know the impact of a lot of the stuff we buy, in part because manufacturers don't conduct life cycle carbon assessments in a comparable fashion. That's one of the limitations that we have in the sector. But that said, we have a lot of good advice around things that you can buy, and well, the appropriate, the most sustainable things that you can. I'll mention this in a second with Leaf. The area that we want to focus on is lab operations, though, and that's the area that we can affect, and that's the area that we're going to look at with Leaf. I wanted to say that we're not alone in this topic. There's a lot of other institutions that are looking at this area, and probably the most notable of which is UKRI. Now, I've gone a bit fast, but I wanted to say that there's a lot we can do around sustainable labs, and there's a lot of different initiatives that people can do. Equally, people are extremely limited for time, as we all know, and not everyone has time to go and to figure out what the sustainable solutions are. What we wanted to do was to make things easy for the folks, in recognition that when there's a standard in place, it removes the requirement of people to go and reinvent everything themselves. And I think the comparison I like to make is either health and safety standards or Athena Swan. We have common standards that we have, and it makes it easier for people to enact, to be safer, to promote gender equality. And that's exactly what we've been trying to do with sustainable lab operations. It's come at a good time, I think. I mentioned before that the UK went for net zero. UKRI is the largest funder of research in public research in the UK, and they've put a target for net zero, and they were commissioned, NERC did that work, if I understand, for them and with them. Wellcome Trust have highlighted their interest in this area by introducing the first step in this area, which is an offsetting scheme. And I'm sure the people that work in sustainability on this call might debate a little bit about offsetting. We've seen the emails actually on EAUC chats quite a bit. UCL has set a net zero target for 2030, and King's has gone for an even more ambitious one of 2025. It's fantastic that we have these targets, and now I think it's about introducing the materials, sorry for the sirens, the materials that researchers, technical staff, lab managers, sustainability staff need to achieve this. What does this actually mean on the ground? The first step in that direction, I would say, is a standard, and this is what we've done with LEAF, standard and sustainable lab operations. It contains criteria around areas. It brings together all these different areas that people were sometimes already doing good practice in. So ventilation equipment, We also have a few criteria on research quality, and those have been developed with us alongside us by the UK Reproducibility Network, who I mentioned before. They have a conference this Friday, their first network meeting, in case anyone's interested. The criteria are divided into bronze, silver, gold. And I think it's worth mentioning that LEAF is a user-led initiative. We're not influenced by manufacturers. We really want to work with users, and the focus is a reduction of carbon and facilitation of science, good science. Within LEAF, we've got some calculators that allow people to estimate the carbon and financial savings. And there's, there's some, they're fun to use. They're optional, by the way, I can say. You don't have to use them, but yeah. What I did want to say is that if you take nothing else away from here today, is that we've put a lot of these resources online anyways. But we have a process guide that we're about to put up, which is how to initiate a Sustainable Labs program. But we also have an equipment guide and a consumables guide. And those are really focused on providing you the technical know-how on how to, for example, the debate about glass versus plastics, which is better. By the way, reuse is always better in case you're unsure. So the reuse of plastic, reuse of glass is better. We have these guides and we're going to update them annually, and that is where we would put the technical advice. So I won't go through any of the technical stuff today, but I would encourage you to have a look at those. And if you see something's missing, please do let us know, and we'll add you as an author. We piloted LEAF for 2 years before this. You can see some of the results on here. And yeah, it was a positive experience overall. Not everyone reported on their savings, but the labs that did report reported some significant savings. And yeah, it was from that feedback that we thought that we had the imperative to go and to run with LEAF to put it online, which it now is. We softly launched it in the start of February, essentially with a lot of our pilot participants and a few others. And we've been supported by UKRN, as I mentioned, and also the National Technician Development Center, in recognition that promoting sustainable practices within labs promotes career development of a lot of technical staff, particularly in this moment where it's not mandatory. It's a way of differentiating yourself. One day, and we're hoping it might become required to do this. We've been engaging with funders to let them know that we're taking action, we're working on LEAF, and we're keen for them to work with them in the future, to make sure that LEAF is an appropriate tool for labs to improve their sustainability. I want to give a shout out to Bristol. University of Bristol became the first institution, I think, in the world to commit to 100% uptake of Sustainable Lab program. And they're using LEAF, and University of Exeter has since also done the same, and they are quite actively implementing LEAF right now. So it's going well. How does LEAF work? If you want to register, drop me a line. The lab would choose their level. They work through the criteria. Just provide a sentence or two for each. We want to reduce the admin. Use the calculators if you like. This is optional though, and submit. And then we have some auditing guides, which are for self-assessment, but we allow institutions to choose the way they audit, but we have some recommended ways to do that. I think that's my 15 minutes, so I want to leave some space for the others, but I wanted to share some screenshots. One thing LEAF does, this is UCL, I was setting up the structure. This is a really important part, is that LEAF allows you to set up a structure to reflect your institution. This means that you can start reporting back into your institution based on the faculty on the outcomes of participating in the program. And when it comes to convincing senior management about why we should integrate these type of efforts, I think that's an important feature. This is just a demo criteria. You can see it has supporting resources. Obviously, it's not watching music, but you can tailor the links to be whatever you like, so that you can have local links and resources. And yeah, those are some of the calculators as you go. For the sake of time, I think I'll stop there and allow I think it's up to Hayley now. But those were some example targets for bronze in case people were unsure. And we have some good practice examples around. But thank you, Claire. I went a little bit quickly, I'm sorry, for putting this together. And I will hand over to Hayley.
Actually, I'm going to let Leah go next because she's going to talk about some of the accreditation. That's not a problem. Thank you so much, Martin. That was a whistle-stop tour. So there's obviously a lot more to hear about, so appreciate you going through that so quickly. If you'd like to just stop sharing your screen, then we'll give the stage to Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Can we just check in? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leah Crosby and I'm the Energy and Environmental Advisor for the British Geological Survey, based at our headquarters in Nottinghamshire. BGS are a world-leading independent research organisation providing objective and geoscientific data, information and knowledge. Our research is divided into three main challenge areas. We've got decarbonisation and resource management, environmental change, adaptation and resilience, and multi-hazards and resilience. So these areas really enabled us to understand how our planet is changing and to contribute solutions and adaptive responses. So I'm here today to provide you with a quick, brief overview of our successful experience with the LEAF initiative. So just before I get into the detail, I just want to give you some background as to where our desire to kind of implement LEAF came from. We recognise that we're experiencing a period of really unprecedented environmental change, and positive action is needed to address the challenges. So in July 2020, we developed our environmental sustainability strategy for BGS as a whole, and this consists of our two biggest sites, and as well as our various smaller sites, which are mainly observatories and research stations. So our strategy states that we aim to be carbon neutral by 2040 in alignment with our parent body, NERC, who are part of UKRI. Within our strategy, we highlight 6 commitments, including our work to increase the sustainability of our laboratory facilities. We highlighted this as our key commitment area because our labs really are the most energy and resource intensive areas on site. So we really aim to reduce these loads through a series of initiatives led by both lab managers and the estates team. And one of these initiatives is LEAF. So we really wanted to use this as a fundamental tool for encouraging change within the labs. So just before Christmas, BGS were awarded with the bronze LEAF accreditation. Now, when it came to completing the criteria for LEAF, it was agreed that we would kind of keep the scope of LEAF at our headquarters, as we felt the labs were more fit for purpose. Our second biggest site is in Edinburgh. However, these labs aren't your kind of traditional wet chemistry labs. So we thought it may not be fit for purpose for the bronze, but we're definitely going to look at it for the silver criteria. Additionally, our headquarter campus is really the only estate where we can manage directly and make large-scale changes ourselves. So on our headquarter site, it's 27 acres with 11 laboratory facilities, including isotope, organic and inorganic geochemistry, as well as a core scanning facility. And these combined equates to almost 100 labs. So as you can imagine, it was quite a task compiling all the information together for LEAF. And initially, I was slightly concerned with us having such a complex science structure, whether or not I was able to collate the right information of the correct people, really. But however, I've had really positive feedback from the scientists who were actively involved in completing the criteria. They said it really helped them to share good practice and actually communicate more frequently with each other. And they also said it encouraged them to actively think about the environmental impact when carrying out their day-to-day tasks. And one specific lab cluster made me aware that they particularly enjoyed carrying out the kind of physical inspections frequently. So looking at things like ensuring the equipment is not switched on when not needed, ensure that the freezers and ovens are at the full capacity kind of thing to maximise efficiency. It's also given the operations side of our organisations a much bigger opportunity to work more closely with our lab staff, which again perhaps did not happen frequently beforehand. And then it obviously in turn enabled us to promote environmental awareness across the business. Just as an example, myself along with the BGS chief scientist presented our LEAF initiative at a staff-wide Q&A session, which was hosted by the director, and it was really successful actually. So by having the LEAF initiative as a driving tool for our labs, it has enabled us to clearly identify where certain improvements can be made, which then helps develop effective policies that are fit for purpose when trying to reach our targets. So it's really encouraged us to implement additional zero waste streams, such as the lab glove recycling, in addition to our glassware recycling scheme that we have. And as Martin alluded to, it's enabled us to evidence statistically the savings that we're making and present the findings and savings to staff. I'm just going to touch on procurement slightly as well. It has enabled us to be actively involved in the procurement process. However, one issue that we did have is it's slightly more difficult to be able to select a more energy efficient option when we have such specialized equipment. But we're working with our parent body on kind of moving that forward. So overall, I really think that the implementation of LEAF has enabled us to see positive changes, not just by helping reduce our carbon footprint, but also kind of as the site as a whole, not just the local lab areas. So I believe these changes may not have necessarily been encouraged if we did not have LEAF as that kind of driving tool for it. And then it obviously overall helps you to improve your environmental management system as a whole as well. And with senior management being on board with it all, it's just an additional kind of environmental awareness and driving tool to kind of get all these initiatives going, really. So yeah, thank you for listening, and please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. And I'll pass over to Hayley.
Great, thank you, Leah. I'm going to let Hayley take over straight away. Hayley, I know you've got some slides to share with us, so if you'd like to pop those up, that'd be great.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Hayley Beharrell. I'm an environment officer at Swansea University. One of two environment officers. Primarily our job is managing the environmental management system, both at a sort of university-wide level, but also sort of local systems within faculties and professional service units. So our role only sort of existed from 2018 when we both started. So when we did both start, we were looking at sort of how the system worked at the university, and sort of noticed there was very limited contact with lab groups. Although we have a lot of labs across both campuses, there was limited contact with them. Labs weren't really addressed on the aspects and impacts register, which is one of our primary tools that we use. And this was a big gap because they are so resource intensive, as both Leah and Martin have alluded to, which then led us to questions of compliance as well. So we had questions about how people were managing their waste and discharge to drain. The waste and recycling officer started at the same time as us as well. So it was quite a big expansion of the team in quite a short space of time. We also found out there had been historical use of green impact labs, but they'd only sort of lasted for 2 years, and that was quite a while before we started at the university. So we kind of put this all together and saw it as quite a big gap. But we were also aware that there were some really innovative spaces that were really keen on being more sustainable at the university. So I guess our main question was, how can we get these labs more actively involved in sustainability at the university, but also coming up with a way of doing this without putting sort of all the emphasis on a central sustainability team and being able to manage it more locally within the spaces. So quite early on, I was able to join LEAN, the Laboratory Efficiency Action Network, which is an amazing group of people. And a lot of the people on the network are from a laboratory background. And myself, I was an environmental consultant, so I didn't have the lab experience. But I was really keen to sort of understand the spaces more and how we could sort of help people manage their own areas. So through LEAN, we found out about LEAF and we got involved with the pilot, which was really exciting. So LEAF is our main tool in delivering a sustainable labs program within Swansea University. This has sort of driven us to develop a sort of lot of resources for the labs to use. So we looked at sort of information sheets on the key topics within LEAF. And we also made a shout of putting this all as publicly available as possible. So it's available to all our staff, all our students, undergrads, postgrads, and our tenants as well. We've got quite a lot of tenants on site. Whilst they might not use the LEAF tool, they do have access to information on how they can be more sustainable in their spaces. And because we're in Wales, it's dual language as well. So we've got it all available in English and in Welsh, which has been great actually working with the translation team on. It's been quite a different project for them and getting it all translated into Welsh. So one of our main sort of uses for the tool is it really helps us address quite a massive sort of value action gap. We had some really innovative research on climate change and glaciers and all sorts of really relevant topics to the climate emergency. But potentially when you walked in the lab, they weren't necessarily managing their lab space as efficiently as possible. So sort of sashes up, equipment on, things like that. So it really helps us to look at this sort of value action gap that does exist in labs across all the spaces on campus. But it's also a really innovative tool that is led by the lab users. So it allows people like myself who may work centrally on a lot of different projects to be involved, but not to have to sort of push it and drive it because it's done within the spaces by sort of key staff. So what else have we done? So we've got a really good safety and sustainability network between all our labs on campus. We work really closely with health and safety, so everything we put in kind of gets ticked off by them, which has worked really, really well for getting everything up and running. We've been implementing LEAF since 2018. We started quite small. We had 5 labs involved in the first year. This was more so we could see how it worked and sort of resources we needed and sort of time input from our side as well. So we got 5 super keen labs and yeah, they got bronze. And then last year we were up to 12 labs. And this year it's increased really dramatically, which is brilliant. And I think a lot of that is to do with more buy-in from the senior leadership team at the university. So as I've already said, we've developed a lot of resources to support our lab groups on site. So we've got our Sustainable Labs website. Feel free to have a look. If there's any information you want to borrow, let me know and I will happily share with you. We're working hard on getting some case studies together as well, some of the spaces that have been involved at sort of bronze, silver, potentially ones that will be moving on to gold as well, just to share experience and sort of linking labs up on site as well so they can talk to each other through the network that we have going on. It's also really encouraged us to work with other groups. I've already mentioned health and safety. We're working really closely with procurement at the moment. So I sit on their lab procurement group. So we've just finished a tender on chemicals and we're currently working on a consumables tender. So there's sustainability questions and everything now. And these ones have been tailored towards the consumables framework that they'll be setting up. We work really closely with the rest of ENFM, so sustainability is part of estates and facilities management, but we work really closely with projects and tech services, and to the point that we can now sort of use LEAF and sort of some of the prompts that we get within LEAF for when they're doing refurbs of labs and things like that, particularly like LED lighting and things that are managed more centrally at the university. We're also working with our research bid team, RISE, and this has initially started off with sort of, they were helping us promote LEAF within the university, and it's now moving on to a green grant project that we're working with them. So that's evolved really well as well. And just sort of forming more connection within the university to help sort of push sustainable labs and the other projects we have going on too. So yeah, so I guess the key sort of part for us is we are supporting the labs, but they are leading within their spaces. So these are some more examples of the work we've been doing. We've got a great waste and recycling officer. She's put together loads of waste management guidance notes. We do sort of direct training with the labs on their wastes. We help them look at sort of how they can recycle, what they can do, any limitations. Again, with recycling, if it gets a bit complex, we've got the health and safety team we work closely with as well there. And we've set up a contract with Uni Green Scheme for reuse of equipment to save it going to WE. We work really closely with our Sustainable Transport Officer and have our Sustainable Travel Procedure, which is going to be launched shortly. And again, that will apply to the whole university, but is an aspect within LEAF. And then procurement, which I've already mentioned. So yeah, there are sustainability standard questions, and we're supporting groups now when they are buying specialist bits of equipment. We're sort of we've got a bit of a database of questions almost that are forming that we can send out to people as examples they can use within their tenders. So as I've said, we're happy to share our resources if you need any help with that. And where are we now? So 3 years on, we have recently received a budget to support our LEAF labs. So it's our Sustainable Labs budget. when we were looking through all the data that we were getting from LEAF and looking at the data we received from the pilot, a lot of the savings were to do with energy, which obviously the labs don't see. We put a paper together and we now have a budget to support our sustainable labs, which is really exciting. And that's a really recent development, sort of last 3 weeks. So that's really good, especially when sort of budgets are being cut in quite a lot of areas in the sector. We've received support from our Vice-Chancellor and the Pro-VC for research as well. So the Vice-Chancellor signed and sent out all the certificates last year. And that has really increased buy-in, just sort of that recognition by the senior leadership team at the university. Laboratories are now well included on our aspects and impact register. In fact, everything we do within the EMS, they're very much part of, just because of this high impact in energy and resource use. So also our auditors are very keen to go in those spaces as well when they come on site each year. It's given us a chance to meet and work with a variety of people across the university, which will then help us feed into our sustainability and climate emergency strategy, which is, I think it's going to senior leadership team tomorrow to be signed off. So just building that network and sort of meeting people and sharing ideas across the campus has been really, really key. I suppose our biggest challenge, as it seems to be in most places, is communication, getting the word out, getting labs involved. Sort of the labs that we have involved, they quite happily talk to other groups who are interested. LEAF is not an onerous tool. There's no sort of, you don't have to write essays for the criteria, and the audits are really, really useful sort of practice going into the space and looking at it with the person who's completed the form as well. So yeah, it's been a really great 3 years, and yeah, really, really useful tool. So I'll hand back over to Claire now.
Wow, thank you, Hayley. That's amazing work and really inspiring, and great that you're getting everyone working together, and particularly your senior leadership team, which is always hugely helpful, I know. Great, so that's everybody who's going to be talking to us. We would like to know if you've got any questions, so either pop your hand up if you do have a question for any of the speakers, or indeed for one another. We've got sure to have some expertise with the participants on the call, so be quite interested to know what your questions are, and you can either pop your hand up, as I said, or use the chat box if that's easier. I've also popped a link into the chat box for everyone on Lean, in case you are looking for the contact details for that, so that's helpful hopefully for some of you. Martin, just to kick us off, you mentioned reuse in your presentation. I wondered if you wanted to pick up slightly on that.
Yeah, it was just a quick mention, is that one of the questions that often comes up around sustainable labs is glass or plastics better? And the reply is usually these days is basically reuse trumps single use. So you can reuse plastic in some ways, and you can reuse glass as well. Obviously, and if it's glass, I hope it's not single-use glass. I would hope, yeah. Essentially, we've been trying to promote reuse, albeit would also say that we recognize that it's very difficult for some labs because it requires resource in terms of time, sometimes to take the time to wash things. I will say though that for at least from all the information we have from a carbon point of view, despite using autoclaves on site, you would reduce your carbon overall if you're using your autoclave or your washing machines to reuse materials. So yeah, overall promotion of reuse.
Perfect, thank you. I don't know if Hayley or Leah have got any experience on reuse. Possibly not. Hayley.
Reuse, people are really keen on, but it's making sure, I guess, they have the facilities so they can clean things sufficiently as well. Some of the labs are quite small, so they haven't had the space, and that's been quite an area of debate, is whether we can set up sort of a central station within faculties and things for cleaning glassware and things like that. I mentioned Uni Green as well. We use them for sort of, there was a lot of equipment just going to which was a real waste. Nobody else wanted it at the university, so they offer a really good service in selling equipment on sort of the university's behalf. we did have to go through a full tender for that to get them on board, which was quite a long process, but we got there in the end, and now it's a facility that's being used a lot by the whole university. So that's worked really well.
I don't know how many of you attended our Scotland conference last week, but Uni Green Scheme did a great workshop just about what they do, and they talked a lot about laboratory equipment. Hayley, don't go away. I was going to ask you about your senior management team buy-in. How have you coordinated that? I mean, was there a process involved?
Yeah, so we've got a new VC. We're relatively new, and we've also got our new sustainability and climate emergency strategy that we've been working on. So sort of between those two things, and we reached out to a lot of groups for some consultation, and the head of sustainability, our new VC has a real keen interest in sustainability and sort of contacted us about projects we were going on. So we presented to him on some of our key projects, and we included LEAF, a sustainable lab tool. And we asked if he'd be willing to sort of sign off and send out emails. And yeah, that just went down really well. And people really liked that sort of level of approval from the senior leadership team. And then when it came to putting a paper together to get some funds as well, that was supported by him, the head of finance, and the Pro VC for research as well. Again, she's got a real keen interest in sustainability. So I think just having those people in post has really helped us to achieve a lot more sort of quite recently, which is good.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. I've also just realised that the chat function hasn't been available to everybody, so I've just enabled it. So hopefully we'll get some questions on the chat function now. If anyone has got a question they want to ask live, please just pop your hand up. I'll give everyone a minute to just think about that. Okay, Vicky Garlick from Durham has asked if there's a cost involved in joining LEAF. Martin.
We ran the pilot for free, and this year what we've said is it's up to institutions to decide if they want to make a contribution towards the running costs. UCL's paid a fair bit now for basically the cost was getting the tool onto an online resource now. So it's taken some development. In recognition that it was our first year and that it was a pandemic year, we said, you know, we'd rather have people be able to use it than not use it. So we leave it up to institutions what they want to pay this year if they do. I think next year we would have to move to a set charging, but the goal of this is, I really want to emphasize, it's not to make profit or to pay for whatever. It's really just to get a tool out there, and it requires a little bit of money to keep up the online resource for it. So I suspect that we'll probably be charging around 1 to 2K per institution as just an institutional fee, just to essentially cover some of my time and the online resource to make sure that it's upkept and etc. And yeah, so there's a little cost, but yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Martin. Another quick question, possibly for all our panel, from Hayley at Huddersfield. Has anyone received any pushback from lab users when implementing LEAF? Some lab users are set in their ways and don't take too kindly to being told what to do by us in estates.
I would say it was one of my my concerns initially, actually, but I feel like once I had a kickoff meeting with all the main kind of lab managers, and once I explained the kind of reduced admin it really does take, and then it's literally a sentence or two, not an essay, and once I kind of got that across to them and explained the kind of meaning for it and how much little time it takes really to have a big impact, they were on board. So once I got past that first hurdle, I think they were on board with it.
Hayley?
Yeah, I think it's been really useful to have those sort of champions in local areas who are really keen. So it's not necessarily coming from estates, although technically we're the admin and sit behind it. It's really sort of driven quite locally. Like we support networks and things like that, but again, it's kind of growing quite organically. We haven't said that they have to do it, but actually there's a lot of buy-in now, and particularly from sort of senior people within the faculties, they're encouraging their labs to join. So I guess there has been potentially a little sort of pushback in some areas of we don't have time and things like that. But once you show them the tool and the fact that it is simple to use, people have been a lot more keen. So yeah.
Excellent. Another one from Beck Bennett. What are the differences to green impact labs?
Very quickly, I'll say that Green Impact Labs, I think Anna Lewis is on here. Her and myself, we used to do some of the editing for the Green Impact Labs tool for NUS. The main differences are, first of all, that there's fewer criteria. I think that's quite important because Green Impact asks you to go through a large amount of criteria and pick and choose them, which in itself requires users to spend a fair bit of time reading through 70 plus criteria. Equally, it meant that it wasn't comparable between sites because people could pick and choose which criteria they would implement. And the online tool actually, it would give you credit for non-applicable, they might have changed it since, but not applicable criteria. Green Impact also doesn't have calculators, so you don't have any idea of the impact of what you've done. So with Leaf, you can choose if you want to. You can estimate some of the impacts. Yeah, and I will say as well, the way the criteria design is that there's supposed to be a flow through it. So you start at bronze, you go to silver, and the way that they're written is supposed to be like, it's not too, it doesn't limit you in a sense. So the example is, if the criteria says turn things off at the end of the day, it says come up with a system to turn things off at the day. You don't have to put on a timer on a piece of equipment, or you have to put on a sticker. It's up to you, and it gives you examples of how to do it.
Great. Quick question here from Fiona Wheatley. To Leah, which glove and glass recycling schemes have you been using? And has managing them been a staff resource intensive operation?
We've been using the TerraCycle zero waste stream boxes. They do a variety of lab kind of recycling schemes. We did decide to have one large box in our stores area rather than having a number of boxes dotted around site, purely because one person can empty kind of one box then and collect from one location. We haven't tried it where we have them dotted around site. I don't know if how much staff time that would take, but how we've done it is it's working really well, and the lab staff are quite happy to collect them all in the local area, then take them down to the stores. It's the TerraCycle. I'll find the link and I'll pop it in the chat.
Great, thank you. I've got a comment and a general question really from Joe Allett from UKRI and NERC. In order to deliver some parts of our sustainability strategy, UKRI are starting to look at sustainability in relation to the things we fund. Not sure if anyone has any thoughts on this, but we'd love to know if there are any things you think we could do as a funder that would better support the sustainable labs, or anything in our T's and C's of funding at the moment that are stopping more sustainable choices. This might possibly be just a general comment in the chat, or really helpful perhaps if you wanted to email us afterwards, and then we can feed that back to NERC and UKRI, because it would be great if we could continue to get their support for your sustainable labs.
Very quickly, I'll just say that comment, that's in part why we were hoping to do LEAF, is we're hoping to assist each other in that sense. So yeah, leave it at that.
Okay. I think we've already answered the question from Rachel about the difference between LEAF and Green Impact. Has anyone got anything else? Thank you, Leah, for your link there to TerraCycle for that. Anyone else got any questions for the panel or for each other? Does anyone have any comments to make for UKRI or NERC on things that they could do to support? Oh, very quiet today.
I'll just add about the glass. It may be worth speaking with the manufacturer of the glass, because they often provide kind of return schemes. But if not, we have our main waste contract provider also. We're with Veolia. They also we have a separate waste glass stream that lab staff use. But we have two. We have both the manufactured schemes and our Veolia recycling scheme for the glass.
Quite helpful. Is it worth us getting a link for that as well?
Yes, I'll just find that as well.
Okay, great. I will put all of these comments from the chat also into a document when I distribute this. I'm going to give everyone a minute more for questions, and then we can close up if there's no other questions. In the interim, I'd really appreciate it if, while we're just waiting for you, we have got a small survey that we would really appreciate you filling in. It's on Slido, so if you go to sli.do and type in labs, you could just fill that in for us. It'd be really helpful for us always to know what you thought of this webinar and what other things you think you'd like to hear about. So that's sli.do in your browser and hashtag labs. I've got one more question from Matthew Bennett. The promotion of sustainability in labs from UKR is important to raise awareness. It's not a question actually, it is a comment. I think UKRI can play quite a big role in this.
Just to add, I think it's a fair point just on the, I think any awareness that shows that this is an important issue, it helps. I think there was an earlier question about how do we convince people to take part in it, and there was these comments around UKRI, and I think that there's a, you can merge those together to say that I think if UKRI shows an interest in these spaces, then it helps the sustainability teams on the ground to sometimes reach some of these folks.
Oh, we've got another question from Vicky Garlick from Durham. To expand on the TerraCycle glove recycling, how easy did you find it to take used gloves to one location, recycle them? Was it difficult to get people to take them in rather than just throwing them away?
I mean, we've got quite a large number of lab staff that are kind of stuck in their ways, if you like. So it can be difficult, but we've been kind of working really hard on our behavioural and cultural change, which is part of our environmental strategy as well. So we've been, the directors on board and the senior management board are on board with our behavioural change as well. So we've been really focusing on that. I mean, it can be difficult, but I think we've gone around it the right way, kind of thing, having kind of lunchtime lectures as we turn them to kind of explain to lab staff why we're doing it, kind of what beneficial for them. But we've not had any major problems with it. It's just that initial behavioural change, I think, and promoting it the correct way initially.
Great, thank you. And thank you for Paolo to add to our technical difficulties to say that the link to the Slido feedback was closed. I've opened it now, so thank you again. Appreciate your feedback on that. Paul Monk at UCL, to Leah, how do you ensure that the TerraCycle collections are compliant? Good question.
I can't answer that right now.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. Yeah, it'd be useful to look into how you might go about that. I don't know, has anyone else used TerraCycle and looked into a bit more in terms of the process of what they do once collections are taken?
Just so I think, Paul, I think you mean by compliant, you mean non-hazardous, just to, is that what you mean?
Sorry, I'm probably being a bit naughty because I've looked into the TerraCycle schemes before. No, it's just in terms of, like, obviously for waste and recycling, we need to have, we need to be able to show our duty of care and be able to have a sort of compliance audit trail for it. And whenever I've looked into TerraCycle collections, they've always been lacking that a little bit. I couldn't get a definite answer as to whether they could provide waste transfer notes and things like that. And because they go by a courier, if I'm right, again, that would just concern me in terms of compliance and them getting to where they're meant to get to. And I just wondered if there was a way that you'd sort of log that and a way you got around that.
I wonder if anyone else in the meeting has got experience working with TerraCycle that might be able to feed into that. Anna.
Hi. Yeah, so at Bristol, we've been doing glove recycling for a couple of years now, although we haven't rolled out across the university. We still haven't figured out whether it's financially feasible, whether the life cycle analysis is any better. And yes, there were a lot of kind of issues around transparency and duty of care. Essentially, TerraCycle are a waste broker. So we did find out that actually in the end, they were using our waste contractor that we were already using to recycle a lot of the gloves. So we, in the end, where we are now, is we'd like to set something up directly with our waste contractors. So that's SLCL, for example. And it's something that Lean, the network, is kind of working on. It's lobbying together to give a lot of impetus and weighting to some of the waste contractors to set something up individually as a waste stream. So that's something, maybe speak directly to waste contractors as a first port of call. But yeah, or give me a shout if you want to talk about it more. It is quite complicated with TerraCycle. And yeah, they're good in some ways, but also not so good in others, put it that way.
Great. I know that we've had comments before on webinars on Lean. So if you aren't part of the Lean network, I would encourage you all to join up, because networking is really important to try and get this right, not only within your universities, but into universities. So that's really helpful. Unless you've got any other questions, I will close the meeting now. Really huge thank you to Martin, to Hayley and to Leah for coming in and talking to us about the work that you've done.